So tonight's presentation was all about high cash flow properties. Previous investment strategies were talked about negative gearing. We're in a very different market now, and that's where these positive cash flow type properties are really, really important. So tonight it's just a bit of a general discussion. We're going to go through some key things to look for in terms of investment property and some of those higher yielding type properties which are going to give you more income, and the reason why you look at doing that and achieving those high cash flow type properties. So a little bit about myself. I've been a long-time property investor, so I've built new properties, renovated existing, done subdivision, and always had a passion for property investment in New Zealand and now Australia. So great times, and as we know, as property investors, it is a really a long-term strategy. So the markets might change, and there might be periods where the property doesn't grow or goes through some negative growth. But if you look at most property in Australia in the capital cities, most houses in the suburbs have performed very well over the last number of years. So it's all about having that long-term view on property investment, and even when the market's changing, having that confidence that we can hold on to the property for the longer term. And that's where the positive cash flow property really allows us to hold on to those properties even when they aren't growing in value through those periods where there's some negative growth. Having that positive cash flow will help protect us and allow us to hold on to that property to the longer term of the market. So some of the things that we're going to cover off tonight is, the number one reason most property investors don't own more than one property. We're going to look for what to look for when we're searching for positive cash flow type properties. So just bear with me. I'm just going to a couple more attendees to let in. Okay, so just got a couple of people joining us tonight. So welcome along for those that have just logged into our property presentation tonight. So I'll just let them come into the group before we continue on. Okay, so the number one reason most property investors don't own more than one property. So the statistics show in Australia about 90% of property investors only own one investment property, and there's statistics and information really to showing it that why. And we're going to help you tonight and allow you to build your property portfolio if that's your long-term property investment goal. We're going to show you what to look for when searching for positive cash flow properties, the types of indication, the types of properties that are going to give you that more than standard income, again, which is going to allow you to hold on to those properties for a longer period. And also by having positive cash flow properties, one of the other benefits is you can actually create a passive income from these properties. And we're going to look at the best types of properties to allow you to build your property portfolio, if that's your goal. So the number one reason most investors don't get past their first investment property is not getting it right with the first purchase. So we all know as property investors, we've heard those horror stories of people not getting it right first time to buy a property, had a bad experience, and then sell the property off and don't understand that the property, getting the first property right is so critical. And if you do get it right, it can allow you to build a very successful portfolio. And the number one reason for that is because of the research and information, and we treat our investment property very differently the way we treat our own property. So we buy our own property to live in, based on emotions, suits our lifestyle and requirements. When we're buying the investment property, it should really be based on the figures, the statistics, the growth, the infrastructure going into the area, the cash flow, all those things that are very, very important. And the best way to learn from whatever we're doing, whether it's sport or business, is learn from other successful people that have gone before us and made those mistakes and learned the right things to do. And if we can use that coach or specialist as an advisor and as a guide, we're much more likely to have a positive outcome from property investors. And that's where the top sports people, they have coaches and continuously practicing every day, working on their skill set and improving their performance. Same thing with property investment. Speak to other people that have owned property, people that have had multiple properties, investment properties, what the positives and also the negatives, and learn out how from those successes, the clues that they'll leave behind, and follow those steps. So having someone guiding you to get into the first investment property the right way and the right type of property in the right location will allow you and give you confidence to keep on building your property portfolio. So a lot of, as we know, we're all online tonight. There's a lot of information out online about property. The number one thing, the first question I'd ask if you're speaking to anyone about, property investment, and someone presenting property, ask them, do they own investment property themselves? And, and what are the downfalls? What are the positives? Like anything in life, there's positives and negatives. And ask them if they have owned property, investment properties, how many of them owned, and what they've learned from that lesson. And if they haven't really owned investment properties, I've owned investment properties in Australia and New Zealand, and had great tenants, not so great tenants, had some great finance structures, not so great finance structures, but you learn a lot along the way in the journey. So again, having that person that's been through that process will really help you and give you a better chance, of success. So as I say with property investment, fall in love with the numbers. And that's why with a lot of property investment, where first-time investors get it wrong, is they buy the local property in the local neighbourhood because they know the area and they feel comfortable with that. So that might be the right choice, but it may not be. So we're looking to buy property in a growing market. And as we know with Australia, it's a very diverse country. So Sydney and Melbourne are a very different part of the property clock than Queensland or Adelaide, for instance. So we need to work out what the market's doing in that particular area, and is that the best area to invest in for long-term growth. So some things that we need to look for when we're searching for positive cash flow: locations with vacancy rates under 2%. So for any of those new to property investment, what a vacancy rate means is a percentage of the properties listed for rent. As an example, a 2% vacancy rate means that for every 100 properties listed for rent, there's only 2 vacant at any one time. So most property experts consider a 3% vacancy rate quite a tight market. So if you're speaking to someone about property investment in different areas and locations, always ask, what's the vacancy rate in that area? And if they can't answer that question, they really shouldn't be giving you advice on property investment. So again, 3% is considered a pretty standard vacancy rate. So anything less than 2%, which is a lot of Australia at the moment, which is great for property investors. There is a lot of positives out there. So don't listen to the media and all the negative hype about property markets and things like that. Base your decisions based on facts. So again, vacancy rates under 2% means it's a pretty tight market, and as long as our property is in good condition and tidy, and we're marketing it at free of market rent, we shouldn't have any issues finding tenants. Second thing we can look for is properties with multiple incomes. So we get a standard house, we have one tenant in place. Might be a house with a family or an apartment with a couple, but which will give us a standard return. But when we're looking now, we're in a market where interest rates are rising, so we need those higher than standard cash flow income type properties to give us a positive cash flow property. We're looking for the net yield above your interest rate. So that's a bit of a guide. So again, when you're looking at property investment and people quote yields, much as like when we get paid, we don't get to spend our gross pay. We get to spend our net pay after the tax. Same thing with property investment. The gross yield is the annual income divided by the purchase price. But on top of that, repayments, there's also all the annual property expenses. And that's where having a cash flow forecasting tool is very, very important. So we should always be looking at the net yield. That's after all the expenses. And we'll go through a calculation tonight just to show you how to calculate that figure. So, so if, for example, if you're borrowing money at 3% and the net yield on the property is 3.5%, it should be positively geared. Properties with a unique factor. So a property with a little bit of a different unique that's going to stand out from the average home. So again, houses with granny flats, multiple income type properties, they can give you a much higher, return or yield or cash flow. So here's an example of a higher cash flow type property. These are known as dual occupancy or dual income type properties. They work very well for property investors. I have actually built a couple myself for my portfolio because of the strong cash flow. So from the front, they look like a fairly standard house, as you can see there. But if you look at the floor plan, there's a dividing wall. So that wall in the red is the dividing wall between the two properties. And there's essentially a unit on one side and a unit on the other side. Now, these can't be built in every city around Australia, but there's certain areas that will allow them, certain councils that will allow them, and they can be designed to give really, really good cash flow. So the smaller type properties, and generally you might have a 3 or 4 bedroom unit on one side, and you might have a 1 or 2 bedroom unit on the other side. They're totally independent. So from an investment point of view, they work very well. So if you look at the photo on the left-hand side of the screen, from the road, as I mentioned. They're designed to look like a fairly traditional house, which is the idea, so they don't stand out in the suburbs. So the front door there, the right-hand side of this property would be the larger size. So this one's got a double garage, it could be a single garage, 3-bedroom with ensuite, so 2 bathrooms, common living kitchen area, and outside al fresco. So a very nice little property, low set. On the left-hand side, with single garages, generally you'll have a gate down the side, and you'll have an entrance into the property there. And there'll be a 1 or 2 bedroom unit on the left-hand side. And again, that's fully self-contained. So the tenants can be independent. Again, double skin fireproof wall between the 2 properties for sound and noise and fire protection. They each have their own water meters, and they each have their own power meters as well. So they're very easy to rent out to individual tenants. So these can give you a much stronger yield than a traditional sort of house. And again, for long-term holding, a very good income, which allows you to pay off the property or the loan or the debt in a much faster scenario. So dual income properties, they are different to a duplex. So essentially a duplex is a side-by-side replica of each other. So there's a picture there. As you can see, they're fairly standard looking units, and generally they're identical in design and size. And depending on the approvals and how the property was built, the benefit of these duplex pairs is quite often they can be strata titled or sold off individually at a later date. So a lot of those older type properties that have been converted with granny flats and upstairs, downstairs aren't council compliant. So when you're looking at these types of properties, again, the questions would always be, are they council compliant? Can they legally be rented out separately? And if you're looking at a duplex type property, you would need to check out with the council and the building approvals and the way the strata has been set up or designed originally. Have they been built so they can be strata titled? They are a very popular strategy, and they can work very well because you can create equity, chunks of equity, by selling the 2 duplexes off individually if they can be strata titled. So it's another popular way. Obviously, you've got to look at the way the property is constructed and the size and design, the land cost, but they can be, great for cash flow. And the benefit is they can possibly be, individually titled off as separate units. Shared living, or what's known as co-living. So we're based in southeast Queensland, where there's a severe shortage of smaller accommodation. And we've got some terrible stories up here of people living in cars, living on park benches because there's simply not enough accommodation. So these are type of properties that have been designed to cater for people that are on their own, and they may not be able to afford a house or an apartment, but they want to live in a nice habitable home. So these are another type of property that can really generate higher cash flow. So if you look at the floor plan, again, they look like a fairly standard home from the street view, which they are. The difference is, as you can see, with each bedroom, so the bedroom on the right-hand side in blue there, that's got its own ensuite and bathroom and walk-in wardrobe. So they can be lockable doors. So the idea of these is you can rent them out per room if you're chasing that higher cash flow. And the other benefit of these type of properties is they can always be rented to a standard family home, family if you wanted to, or they can be sold as a family home with extra bathrooms. So they're not limited to be resold just as an investment property. But a little bit different to the dual occupancy, where they're really catered for investors, unless you've got parents with grandparents or parents living there, or teenage children live on one side and live on the other. But generally they'll be sold as an investment type property. The benefit of the shared or co-living is they can be sold as a traditional home in the long term. So very well appointed, as you can see there, kitchen, living, dining areas, second living areas, a quite spacious home, and lots of storage cupboards everywhere, as you can see there. And again, the benefit is each bedroom has its own bathroom, own ensuite. So again, you could choose to rent it out to a family, depending on the demand in the market, or if you're looking for that higher cash flow and the demand is there, you could rent them out as per room. So this is where I would always recommend a specialist property manager that understands how these types of properties work. So again, that would be the question of when you're appointing the property manager, have you done these before? Do you understand how they work, and how do the individual leases play as well? So they can be signed up to individual tenants, but again, just make sure they're council compliant, they're built correctly, and the property manager understands how these types of properties can be rented out. Another concept which takes the one step higher is known as rooming accommodation. So these, this particular design you can see on the left-hand side, again, it looks like a fairly nice two-story standard home, but in fact it's 5 individual rooms. Now the benefit of these properties is that each room is fully self-contained. So if you look at the, let's look at bedroom 4. So this is the entrance here for bedroom 4. So it's got its own kitchen, bathroom, living, and separate bedroom. So it's you know, even better than a studio apartment. So quite spacious. Great design. This one, they've even got their own outside entertaining deck as well, small entertaining area. But again, they're self-contained. So if we were looking at these from an investment point of view, so each room is individually security key locked. So push button key locks. I do have a video if anyone would like to see a walkthrough video of how these properties operate and how they look inside. Very high finishes, and you know, purpose built for you know, high cash flow. So this is a 2-story design. So you can see the property there on the lower level. Come in through the property, and you've got a bedroom here. And you have your own a separate living, kitchen, dining, communal area as well. So if the tenants just simply want to be on their own, they can come in after work and they can lock themselves in the room. They're self-sufficient, have their own little kitchenette, bathroom, lounge area, living area. But if they've got friends over or they want that social connection, they can move into the larger communal sort of living area, kitchen area, which are larger, obviously dining, kitchen, combined as well. So again, with the backyard and entertaining area, work very, very well. So these are really high cash flow. Now there is other types of high cash flow type properties. I know there's a lot of talk around these NDIS type schemes. A lot of those schemes are relying on government funding, and that can work really well when the government funding is in place, but it can change over the longer term. Whereas these types of properties we're talking about tonight can be rented to anyone that qualifies in terms of their you know, income. So you've got a lot larger pool of potential tenants for your investment property, and having a property tenanted, an investment property tenanted, is really the key to hold on to that property for the long term. We're talking about cash flow, so having those a wider range of pool of tenants is much more safer over the long term. So I know some of these other holiday let, student accommodation type properties, NDIS, can look very, very good on paper. However, my only question would be to really look at the true costs and the vacancy rates, because some of those other properties can have a higher vacancy rate, and you really need to be aware of those other property costs as well. Higher management costs, again, these higher type cash flow properties is another big question, you know, we should always be asking. And that's why having someone of experience that understands how they work and the, you know, the income and also the expenses, and be able to calculate that. So before we make the decision on the property, you know, we understand the cash flow. So that's some examples of high cash flow type properties. So let's take it one step further and let's compare the numbers. So we're comparing, and some of the reasons why we obviously would look at these type of properties. So on the left there, we have a standard home. So let's say it's worth 800,000. And let's compare it in terms of cash flow to a dual occupancy property valued at 800,000. So here we've broken down the cash flow. So on the left is the maybe a 4 or 5 bedroom home. Its purchase price is 800,000, rented at $700 per week. So our gross rental income is 33,600. We're going to save some tax deductions on that older home, around about 2,000 per year. So our gross income is going to be about 35,600. Now we have loan repayments, so depending on your interest rate, but this is just using a standard rate, 800,000 at 3% interest only. So the mortgage payments are going to be around that 24,000 per year. The annual property expenses, so that's rates, insurance, property management, gardening, bit of maintenance on an older property, is going to be about 8,000 per annum. So that means our yearly outgoings, the combined of the mortgage payments and the annual property expenses, around about 32,000 per year. So we have 35,600 gross income. Yes, less our yearly outgoings of 32. So that's going to give us a cash flow of about 3,000 per year positive cash flow. So let's compare it to a dual income high cash flow type property. 800,000 property, we're probably going to get a minimum of $800 per week. So that's going to give us a gross income, and of course these figures are approximate, but they'll depend on the individual property, but these are going to give us an approximate comparison scenario. So gross rental income of about $38,400 per year. We're going to get tax savings depending on your taxable income, but the average income about $10,000. Now the reason why we can claim more tax deductions, because this would be a new or newish type property. So depreciation on an investment property is very strong with a new property. So depreciation we can claim two ways. So we can claim depreciation on any property for the first 40 years of its life based on the construction value. So it's 2.5% per year over 40 years. So that's the depreciation on the building itself. And then we can claim depreciation on the fixtures and fittings, which are things like carpet, light fittings, air conditionings, light switches, all those other things. And they will generally have a working life of about 2 to about 10 years. So in the first 10 years of a new property, we get very good tax deductions, which can really increase our cash flow or our income. So that's why the depreciation or tax savings is stronger on the newer dual income type property compared to an older property. So that gives us a gross total income of about $48,400 per year. Let's say our loan repayments, same figure, $800,000 at 3% interest only. So our mortgage payments around about $24,000 per year. Property expenses, $8,500 per annum. So that means our yearly outgoing is about $32,500. So that's the mortgage plus the property expenses. So you have a gross income there of $48,400, less our property expenses of $32,500. So that gives us a positive income of $15,900 per year. So that's a really good comparison, $3,000 versus $15,900, and it's over $240 per week extra income. The reason why this is really important is because we all understand as property investors, we are in a market where interest rates are continuing to increase and will, according to the forecast, over the next few years. So we really need to be aware that a property that might be, neutrally geared today is not going to be positively geared when we have an interest rate rise. So having that protection and that extra income really insulates and protects us from those interest rate rises. So again, that property that's $3,000 a year positively geared for a standard home, once we get interest rate rises as we're experiencing and forecast, that property might turn into a neutral or negatively geared property, which is really not ideal for holding on the property for the long term. With the higher cash flow type property, we've got a surplus income of $15,900. So even if interest rates, rise, which they will do, we've still got a positive income property. And it's not only the income from the property, it's what we can do with that income, that surplus income. So if we're, planning to buy these investment properties to fund our retirement, obviously we want to remove that debt from that investment property as quickly as possible. So this higher income will replace that, pay off that debt much, much faster. And then if we get to retirement and we can hang on to the property, it gives us a very strong positive cash flow as well. So that's based on today's figures. And as we know, with rental income over the years, another 10 or 20 years, that rental income is going to be much stronger. So that $15,900 by the time we get to retirement is going to be much larger, much stronger. If we don't have a passive income in retirement, we can use this investment property or a number of these properties to fund our retirement. So that's a really good comparison. So I do have specialized software that calculates the cash flow of the investment property. So if anyone has got current property and they'd like to see a cash flow forecast based on their specific property in detail, I can produce a very detailed 6-page report known as a property investment analysis. So it goes into all the incomes based on your deposit, based on your taxable income, the purchase price, the mortgage, the rent, depreciation, very detailed report. So again, having those, understanding those numbers and that cash flow is, really critical. And that's the success to building that multiple income portfolio, having those properties that are not costing us per week and now drawing from our other regular income, so they can pay themselves off, or we can use that surplus income to pay our own principal place of residence off if we choose. So as we know with investment property, generally it's the tax component that's, the interest component that's a tax deduction, but the principal isn't. So that's why if we've got any debt on our a principal place of residence, a lot of people and a lot of finance specialists recommend that you pay that debt off, which is what I do myself, and then leave the the interest only on the investment property. So that's a really good comparison. Again, those figures will vary depending on the type of property. So we've got a chat box on the right-hand side of your screen in the Zoom. So if you've got questions or would like any questions answered or would like to see in a bit more detail, you're welcome to put a message in there and I'll be able to answer those questions. If you would like a discussion, a quick phone call about how these properties work and where they can be located and the numbers in a bit more detail, comparison, you're welcome to put a message in the, Lisa, my assistant, is going to put a link in the chat box there, and you can jump into the link and book a strategy call with myself, and we can discuss in a bit more detail about these properties, price points, how they work, where they can be located. So for any of those that are attending tonight that are based in Sydney, we are actually coming to Sydney. So we're based in Southeast Queensland. So I'm a property buyer's agent. So my role is to source properties, whether it's your property to live in or the investment property. As an investor myself, I understand the figures, and investing in the right location is very, very important. So as we talked about earlier, when you look at the CoreLogic, the latest May figures for CoreLogic, we all understand that the Sydney and Melbourne market that have seen many years of growth, probably 12 years of capital growth. At some point, those markets were going to slow down, and we're seeing that in the figures coming through in the data now. So not the dramatic falls that the media talk about, but the real numbers, they are falling in value. And that was to be expected because of the long-term growth. And most people in Sydney and Melbourne that own property or bought investment properties have done very well. Southeast Queensland and places like Adelaide are in a very different sphere. So we're in Southeast Queensland, so we haven't seen the growth that Sydney and Melbourne have experienced. So our time in the property clock, that 6 to 12 o'clock, is really coming into play now. So there's a number of reasons for that. Our property market has been stagnant for many years, pretty much since the GFC. So it was going to come back into that growth cycle. And also now we've got a lot of interstate migration. So if anyone that's looked at the numbers recently, Queensland's the fastest growing region in Australia presently. And that's important if you're looking to invest for property, for capital growth, and also for cash flow. You want to be investing in these areas where there's demand for property and where people are needing rooming or rental accommodation. And again, that's where that vacancy rate that I mentioned earlier is really critical. It's a very simple calculation. I have tools that can show you that. So if you're thinking of looking at an area, you'll know the vacancy rate, you're welcome to reach out to myself, and we can explain that vacancy rate.
I've put the link to Sydney in the chat.
Okay, thank you, Lisa. So Lisa's my operations manager, so she's put the link in the chat box. So if you put the link in there, Lisa will contact you and we'll book in a suitable time. So we can help you out. So these types of high cash flow properties, so we work in northern New South Wales and southeast Queensland. And again, it's a market where there's massive demand for property. Huge shortage of rental accommodation, which is great news for property investors in the current market. So we're not only seeing capital growth, we're also seeing the rental income increase as well. So again, if you read the media, there's been some real horror stories about rental increases jumping up by figures that I would have never thought possible. I've heard stories of rents jumping up $100, $150, $200 a week, which is a massive, very sad if you're renting a property. It makes it very tough. So we can't, control that market. The market is what the market is. But as an investor, that means our rental return is going to be higher, better selection of tenants, and more demand for property. So there's a lot of positives happening in southeast Queensland. So if you're based around the country and you're looking for, to invest in an area where there's a lot of demand for rental properties, and you're looking at those higher cash flow type properties, I can help source those types of properties. As I mentioned earlier, for anyone that's just jumped in, I've had built duplexes, built a couple of dual occupancies myself, so I understand how they all work, and can go through the figures and answer all those questions that I'm sure you would have. So we are coming to Sydney. So again, we're based in sunny Queensland, but we've got a lot of demand. We have a lot of our Sydney investors asking questions about what's happening up in Queensland. It's a very different market, as I mentioned, to Sydney and Melbourne. I really want to understand what's really happening on the ground up here. And for anyone that lives in Queensland, I'm sure you would have seen, there's a lot more cars on the roads, queues of traffic, new infrastructure being continually built, new hospitals, schools, universities, education. A lot of these big corporations are expanding up here, so there's a lot of positive vibes. Again, if you're based in Sydney, but you'd like to know a bit more information about the Queensland market, we're actually hosting a live property investment masterclass down in Parramatta. So it's held at the Ridges Parramatta. It's on the 25th of June, so it's a Saturday, so it's not this weekend, it's the following weekend, and it's at 2 p.m. So we've booked it for Ridges. There's lots of complimentary on-site parking to make it very easy for everyone. So we'll be covering a bit more detail about cash flow numbers, going through the market and happening in Southeast Queensland. And it'd be great to meet anyone that's watching tonight that would like to know what's actually really happening from people that own investment properties up here in Queensland and how these high cash flow type properties work. At the event, I'll also have property examples available and run everyone through the process as well. So the live event is 2 p.m. And we'll be having a Q&A session at the end of it. And from that, we'll be in Sydney for a few days from Friday, pretty much through to the Monday to book one-on-one appointments. So if you'd like a private appointment to discuss your individual position in terms of property investment, what the opportunities are up here, happy to schedule a one-on-one appointment. So for many of those that have joined our Facebook group or watching through Facebook Live or another platform tonight, you may or may not be on our mailing list. So if you haven't had a reminder today that the webinar was on tonight, you're probably not on the database. So what we do is we give a lot of content about property investment and home ownership to help those getting on the property ladder or those looking to get into property investment. So we have a Top Tips Tuesday. Every Tuesday we give content, and it really is designed there to help those looking at property or property investment. So if you'd like to have information about that and like to subscribe, please put your details in the chat box, and we will contact you and add into the mailing list. So we have also properties of the week. So if we find a specific property that we think is outside the outperform the average market in terms of cash flow and capital growth, and it's a very good opportunity, we'll actually post that on our page. So we have a lot of followers that are looking to get into property and they're just looking for the right opportunity. As many will be aware, in Queensland there's a huge demand for property. Most property is selling very, very quickly. So having those properties, off-market properties, or before they had the realestate.coms and domain.coms, is a real benefit if you're looking to secure a great property. And these high cash flow type properties, they are unique. So not everyone understands, where we can buy them and how they work and the numbers around that. So again, if you'd like that, explained in a bit more detail, happy to, have the discussion. So as I mentioned, there is a chat box on the bottom of your screen. So if anyone's got any questions, you're welcome to turn your microphone on or type a message in there and ask any questions, and we'll be able to answer those and help you out. So that's a very good time to be into property investment when you get the figures right and understand that property investment is a long-term strategy. So for any of those getting started, the market, we can't guarantee the market over the next 6 or 12 months, but what we know with good secure investment property over the long term, these areas will grow very, very strongly. So if you've asked anyone in Sydney or Melbourne or Brisbane, the Gold Coast, 30 years ago, what they probably would be worth in 30 years time, I don't think many could imagine what the current values are. So even in a declining market where properties are flat or stagnant for a number of years, which is quite common in the property cycle, as an example, 2/3 of the cycle, most property is fairly stagnant. It's really the last third. And no one knows that fact, that perfect timing. So they always say it's time in the market, not the timing of the property purchase. So having a long-term view of property investment. So there'll be some years when that property will grow in value and be great, and there'll be other years where it won't grow as much or might go into negative territory. And that's where having a positive cash flow type property will allow you to hold on to that property, and means you don't have to sell it to fund the upkeep or the costings. That positive income can allow you to keep that property even in the part of the cycle when it's not growing in value. So great opportunity. And as I mentioned earlier, understanding the cash flow is really the key ingredient to building that property portfolio. Now, the other thing to factor in is, we all know, as I mentioned earlier, interest rates are increasing, and that means the serviceability for ourselves as investors is going to drop, going to lower. So having that higher cash flow is going to increase the borrowing capacity. So what we're seeing now with these changing interest rates is that it's really going to affect our future purchases. So whether it's the home to live in or the investment property, having that borrowing capacity allows us to choose our property and our location. So the higher the income, the higher the borrowing capacity is really going to help us. And also, if our goal is to build multiple properties, that's the number one way to give us the best chance of securing that finance, is having that high cash flow, where that property is going to grow and pay itself off over the longer term. And of course, the ideal dream of having that portfolio, and we don't need a huge amount of properties, 3 or 4 properties for most people on an average wage, and paid off at retirement stage is going to create that that passive income. So it's a great way of increasing and not relying on government security and pensions and super. We don't know what that's going to do in the future, but we've got our own income sorted. Anything else is a bonus, on top of that. So again, high cash flow type properties are a little bit specialized. You need to have someone that understands how they work. You need to ask a lot of questions around the cash flow, and always remember it's the net yield that's a true return on an investment. So whatever the gross yield is, sometimes a standard house, a freehold type property, the gross yield and the net yield will be fairly close, but probably with higher than average property expenses, such as an apartment. You might have high body corporates, or a holiday let type properties where there might be a higher vacancy rate, or cleaning costs. All those things can really affect or reduce the net yield. So again, always do the calculation, always look at the net yield and see the return on the investment. So you're looking at the cash flow plus the yield of the property as well. So I hope that's explained those higher income type properties and given everyone some knowledge on how they work and some of the questions that we need to be asking on those, and some of the the pros and cons of owning those type of properties, and the benefits of looking at property and having a specialist that can help you, step you through the journey and answer all those questions. So again, if you're new to property investment, whoever you're looking at building your property portfolio, you should also be guided by someone that's owned investment properties and can give you that, hand you down that experience and the right questions to ask, and also understanding the cash flow in a lot of detail. So that's pretty much wrapped up tonight's event. So thank you everyone for attending. I'm going to open up the Q&A session now. So if anyone's got any questions, if you can just type them in the question bar, or some feedback would be greatly appreciated. And we'll see if we can help you out. So just going to have a bit of a pause and answer any of those questions that come through. And we will let everyone go for the evening. Okay, so again, we are going to end the session very shortly. I hope everyone's got some value out of it. We have recorded tonight's presentation. So if you're on our mailing list, you'll receive an email tomorrow. So again, if you haven't had any reminders about tonight's event, probably means you're not on our list. And if you'd like to receive the current market updates and content on property ownership and property investment, you're welcome to join our mailing list. Again, just put a comment or an email in the chat box, or reach out to us. Or whether our content is on our property page, gctproperty.com.au, and we have a YouTube channel. So there's a lot of content. So again, if you want to understand this cash flow in a bit more detail, if you go into the YouTube channel, there'll be a lot more videos breaking that down, and we watch them and get a good understanding of the numbers and also the cash flow. So again, thank you everyone for attending tonight. We are going to end the session very shortly. If there's no more questions coming through, greatly appreciate your participation tonight in the audience and viewing, and welcome to, we will send a recording out. Okay, and
thanks
for any of those.
Says thank you.
Okay, thanks. Who was that?
Kim, Douglas and Dylan also thank you.
Okay, thanks guys, thanks for the feedback. So it's a little bit hard when you're presenting and not sure if the information is getting portrayed correctly. So again, we love feedback. Our role is just to help our investors. I love property investment. I've been a property investor myself, and had really good experiences. But one thing, if I had guidance when I really started in my property journey, would have been a very different outcome now. So we're learning. So again, having that coach or that guide someone experienced, and will really make your property investment journey, a lot more successful. And that's where we hear these stories of these very successful people retired with a passive income. A lot of them have done it through, property investment. So getting that demand. The other good thing about Australia is we've got a shortage of accommodation. There's only although we're a big country, there's only certain parts of Australia that's habitable, and going to those capital cities, although it's going to cost us more to get into the market, those areas where people want to go and that population growth is attracted to, that'll give us the long-term cash flow and also capital growth as well. So when you're looking at property, if you're chasing those high cash flow type properties, sometimes those regional areas will provide that higher income, but you've got to really look, is that population in that market growing? Because that's really supply and demand that's going to give you the balance of cash flow and also capital growth, which is very important to use that equity to fund the next property. So it's not only the cash flow, it's a combination of capital growth and cash flow. Okay, so thank you everyone for attending tonight. Again, hope everyone's got some value out of it, and for those that are attending tonight that are based in Sydney, I'd love to see you at the event. If you're on our mailing list, you'll get an invitation to that. If you're not, you're welcome to give us a call. My direct mobile is 0404 852 781 for any of those that would like to give us a call. We're always happy to chat. We love property investment, and if you're looking for those high cash flow type properties, which when we talk higher cash flow, we're talking properties giving us a sort of 6 to 9% return. So thank you everyone, have a great evening, and we will be running more of these content evenings. So again, any feedback would be well appreciated, and good luck with your property investment journey.